Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss another consequence of Trump's senseless trade policy, which is starting to have an effect which will lead to shortages and higher inflation in America if something isn't done. It's not tariffs as such, although the sheer scale of the tariff policy is causing it. Because although Trump keeps talking about non-tariff barriers to American trade, he's just imposed a big one on his own public. The massive amount of red tape required to administer the policies means that because there aren't enough staff to do it, even more trade is being lost than the tariffs alone should strictly cause. And another feature of Brexit rears its ugly head for Americans. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So a second Brexit video in one day, only this is Trump's Brexit. So Brexit Mark 2, revenge of the even dumber Brexit. So one of the big impacts of Brexit in Britain was not just that all of a sudden loads of paperwork was going to be needed to demonstrate that imports were meeting legal standards and that customs duties were being paid properly. It was that we didn't have the staff to do it. We didn't have the capacity at all. Before Brexit, people working in logistics at the port of Dover were saying the number of checks would need to increase by literally 100 times as much. That they were only carrying out 1% of the checks they would need to after Brexit. Well, we simply didn't have the capacity to expand the check-in facilities to that extent at Dover because it's on the coast. Building in the sea, a little bit tricky. However, the Tory government at the time did suggest that they would expand that capacity to meet the extra demand. Michael Gove, the minister in charge at the time, talked about needing to hire an extra 50,000 officials. Said at the time, absolutely impossible. Like, imagine it. Not just the cost of that, but just imagine. Think about your own workplace. Every now and then a new employee starts, right? What happens? Someone mentors them, all right? Just to show them the ropes. Even if they're an expert in their field, they still need to know how your business operates, right? So someone will, keep an eye on them, help them out. Now imagine an industry or a sector gets more new employees than exists of the established staff. Impossible to mentor them all. I mean, 50,000 new staff. You can't mentor that many. Plus, it would have meant that the UK would have had more officials or unelected bureaucrats, as they liked calling them, than the whole of the EU. That's what Brexit would have done to us. It would have meant we would have had more officials than the whole EU. Impossible target to meet. And within about 6 months, I think they seemed to drop the idea altogether and just do without. The consequence is that imports were not being checked. So smugglers were and still are having a great old time of it. And that is because if you don't expand your capacity to meet the new levels of paperwork and checks, you've got two choices. The first is you slow down the flow of imports to the point where your existing capacity can cope with it, which means you're going to have goods stuck in limbo for days or even weeks at a time, which is a hell of a problem for not only businesses that need those supplies quickly for their own production, but, like fresh food, getting fresh food into the country, that's a massive problem. That's just going to go off. Also a problem for just getting goods directly to the shop shelves, right? Your second choice is you just wave most things through without very many checks at all. But then you stack the odds in favour of smugglers who now have a much higher chance of getting most of their stuff through. Every now and then something might get caught, but it'll just be very rarely. So then you lose out on import duties because people can fill in the paperwork deliberately incorrectly and they know there's a good chance no one's going to check it. And you can get substandard produce coming into the country. Now, we chose the second of those two options because shortages are politically more damaging for the government than the odd person getting sick from dangerous food or losing out on billions of pounds worth of import duties, even though the Treasury could really use those funds. But with Trump's tariff regime, he has created the same scenario for the United States. Masses of extra paperwork are now needed. Someone has not only got to check the paperwork, they've got to carry out physical checks of the goods to make sure that what's in the box is what's on the paperwork. And there's a greater motivation to lie on the paperwork now because your goods, you're sending these goods and your customer can't afford to pay maybe even the 10% tariff. So there's a motivation to try and lie about what's in the box or how much of it's in the box or something like that to reduce the tariffs, yeah? And I'll give you an example of why this is important. So Trump has applied 145% tariffs on Chinese imports, right? So let's look at a concrete example. But there is an exemption on, say, computers. So let's say you're a Chinese company exporting something which still has the full fat 145% tariffs on them. But you say the box contains computers, right, to bypass those costs for your customer at the other end. Now, if you think there's a good chance it's going to be checked, then that's no good because it'll just then get held up. But if you think that they're going to be too busy, you might risk it. So customs officials, they have to carry out the checks to make sure that the system isn't being fiddled. Or, in order to avoid shortages, because they don't have enough staff now to cope with all the extra paperwork and the higher risk of smuggling, do they just quietly not pay close attention, wave a lot of stuff through like we did in Britain, talk tough for the media, but not actually collect the tariffs robustly? Now, I didn't know which way they were going, but there was an article in the BBC explaining that DHL have suspended basically a load of deliveries to the US altogether because of this increase in red tape. So they're just not making any deliveries to the USA on consignments worth between $800 and about $2,500 because of the increased amount of paperwork on those consignments, which has just been introduced. At least they're not going to do it until they can work on a way of managing the process without having days of delays. And that would suggest that the US government have opted to prioritise the enforcement of their new trade barriers over the flow of goods. In fact, in the BBC article, it cites the US government suggesting that many shippers in China conceal the true contents of their shipments. Yeah, that's called smuggling, and ironically giving customs officials way more work to deal with without more resources means that they will be less likely to catch it. Or, as I say, you create huge delays to goods getting through, breaking supply chains, hurting the American manufacturing businesses who are waiting on those supplies, and until they get them, they can't produce their products and therefore supply their customers, and creating shortages and higher prices for American consumers. I wonder if Trump's trade gimp, Peter Navarro, actually considered the practical impact on logistics of these tariffs, or was he just imagining what the impact of the tariffs would be in an idealised system where the management of those imports remained the same, despite the extra load on the system without the extra resources. Because although Trump cites wanting to tackle the trade in, say, illegal drugs, these tariffs will absolutely increase the risk of smuggling and false declarations. The scale of the tariffs are business ending for companies around the world. So the consequences of being caught will for some become less serious than the consequences of not being able to sell their goods at all. America risks here a situation whereby customs officials are being given more work to do at the same time as you are raising the potential rewards for people to produce false declarations. And it may only get worse in a couple of weeks. So Trump is going to abolish the de minimis rule, which exempts duties on consignments worth under $800, at least for China. I'm not sure whether it's across the world. This may just be for China. Now, in theory, it avoids people falsely claiming the consignments are worth less than $800, because at the moment, a consignment going to America, if you send something to America and it's worth less than $800, there'll be no duties on it. Now, let's say it's worth, I don't know, $900. You might go, oh, it's only worth $795. So there may already be some of that going on, right? But so there's a sense in which if you get rid of that, okay, you simplify it so the duties will be due on everything, right? But as the tariffs are mostly percentage based, there is still a motivation to not be entirely honest about the value of the goods sent. And it also means small businesses and individual consumers are going to be getting an unwelcome additional bill for maybe 145% extra to receive their package from China after May the 2nd. I think I was talking a couple of weeks ago about my wife is into soap making, so she gets some of her supplies. Some of them come from Britain, some comes from China. And there's American soap makers, Americans all sorts, for whatever reason, getting stuff from China. And if they order that stuff after May the 2nd, and they're not aware of the impact of the tariffs, like they may order $200 worth of stuff, and find that it's going to cost you. So it'll arrive and then they'll find that they've got another bill to pay because they'll have to pay the import tariffs of hundreds of dollars on top. could come as quite a nasty shock if people aren't expecting it. Trump and Navarro are focusing on the damage this does to Chinese businesses in particular. But are they considering the impact on American consumers? The reason America imports so many goods from around the world is they enjoy the consumer power they have and they're keen to exercise it. In Britain, the government understood that they couldn't afford to let their Brexit policy be linked with a rapid drop in consumer power. So they had to reduce it slowly, frog in a boiling pot style. So they introduced Brexit barriers slowly over a period of years. Trump seems to be ignoring this. He's hitting his own public spending power hard and fast, either not thinking about it or of the belief that there will be no major public backlash once it starts to be noticed. Is he right? Or will he be inviting a summer of discontent, just when the country starts to experience much better protest weather? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.